In yet another sign of economic contraction, we are seeing now manufacturing in the United States has started contracting for the first time since May of 2020. And as we know, the Federal Reserve is looking for signs of economic slowdown as a leading indicator of inflation coming down. This definitely fits the bill. Output for manufacturing weakened because of a third straight month of shrinking orders. In fact, this measure has fallen in 5 of the last 6 months and is now below 50. 50 is gauged as the threshold between an expansion, economically speaking, and a contraction. This is the first time it's happened since May of 2020. For a visual here, for the last almost 10 years, this number is normally above 50. We briefly dipped below at the end of 2015 there, and then we also obviously dipped below going into 2020 here. Now, this highlights something that is of fierce debate in economic circles about what causes inflation, supply side, demand side, and many times I've gone on the record saying it's a monetary phenomenon. When you increase the supply of money and put it into the hands of Americans, they're going to spend that money. That is increased demand. And then from that increased demand follows, hey, we're going to produce more because clearly there's demand for it. But then the money eventually runs out as prices are bid up to compensate for all that extra money floating around in the system. And if you don't continually expand the supply of money, then there's not an additional amount of money necessary to support those higher prices. So buying then has to slow down as people just can't afford it anymore. And then there's a production contraction. This is the classic boom bust cycle, the Austrian business cycle theory that states, hey, when you expand the supply of money, it's going to work its way throughout the economy, bidding up prices. There's an artificial boom that takes place as there's this wealth effect where people feel richer, but they're actually not, because you can't print wealth into existence. You can only print money into existence. So people spend because they think the savings pool is large, and so they take out debt and spend extra money, but all you've done is divided up the number of units in the savings pool. You haven't actually expanded the savings pool. It's like a pizza. If you have 8 slices of pizza and then you need 2 pieces to get full, well, it does nobody any good to just slice some extra slices into there and give it 16 slices, because now you need 4 slices to get the same amount of pizza. It's the exact same way with money and the economy. Money measures wealth. It isn't wealth. And so money is like the slices and wealth is like the actual food that you're eating there in the pizza. And so when you print more money to chase after the same amount of goods and services, prices are going to go up, and then it's just going to take more money to get the same amount of stuff. And ultimately, once that buying demand pressure, once that runs out, that purchasing power runs out, then everything has to collapse back down to where it was before. And ultimately, you get this very volatile cycle that people call the business cycle. It's not the business cycle. It's really a debt cycle. And that boom, that artificial boom, makes the bust inevitable because it was built on an artificial expansion of credit that eventually has to deleverage. And that's exactly what we are seeing take place before our very eyes right now. Another measure of this is that there are shrinking payrolls in the sector as manufacturers cope with labor shortages and a moderation in demand. Companies have been reducing employment levels through hiring freezes, attrition, and now layoffs. Going from October to November, layoffs were mentioned 14% of the time in November versus only 6% in October. This is exactly what the Federal Reserve is attempting to do. Stop the money supply from increasing, and you have a destruction of demand take place because you don't have enough money coming in to support the higher prices on the business side and the household side. That means prices fall, and when prices fall, then that gets passed through to wages in the form of pay cuts and layoffs and unemployment and hiring freezes and furloughs. The Federal Reserve's express purpose in tightening right now is to cause you economic pain, to take money away from you so that you cannot afford to continue to go out and buy things at higher prices so that those prices will come down. And we're seeing that in regular small businesses as well, as the smallest ones are laying off the most workers. In fact, moving from September of this year to October of this year, businesses that were 1 to 9 employees in size had the biggest monthly change since March of 2020. When you start seeing indicators that are saying, hey, right now this economic indicator is as bad as it was all the way back in the beginning of 2020 when the Federal Reserve printed a few $1 trillion to stop the crash, and now those things are coming back, now people are able to see the Federal Reserve cannot do anything like a free lunch. You cannot print trillions of dollars to stop the crash and then have no unintended consequences. If you print trillions of dollars to stop a crash, you're going to eventually cause inflation, which they did, and then you're going to have the bust. And so first you're going to get inflation instead of a crash, and then you're just going to get the crash anyway. People would have been far better off if the Fed would have just stayed out of it, kept their sticky fingers out of intervening in complex markets that central planners don't understand, let things crash. People would have been far better off because we're still getting the crash anyway, but at least we wouldn't have had the record-breaking inflation in the meantime. And just as always happens with monetary policy, fiscal policy intervening in complex markets in order to try and save the economy, it's not the billionaires who take the hit. It's not the elites who take the hit. It's not the big guys who make the big donations to the politicians. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. No, it's the smallest businesses, the small entrepreneurs, the people who are working everyday lives, employing just a few people, family and friends, that are taking the biggest hit because they do not have the financial buffers to absorb the blows like massive corporations do. Massive corporations that I might add have access to public markets, public capital markets, debt markets that are artificially cheap and have been for decades because of central intervention. There's always a debate about whether this is strictly incompetence or malevolence. And I've always said it doesn't matter because the results are the same. And if you ask them, they probably would say, no, we're doing this out of compassion and mercy. We're trying to save the economy and stop people from experiencing economic pain. But when you have a track record of decades of doing the exact opposite and forcing a transfer of wealth away from the majority of people, which the majority of people are poor, to the elites and the richest because of your monetary policy, you have to take a look at the results and say, well, it looks as if the actions that you continue to repeat continue to have the same results. Maybe that is your intention. Which means that as the economic contraction continues to take place, we move further into economic hard times, asset prices will continue to be in a bear market here. But when inflation meaningfully comes down, that also means that the Federal Reserve has room to pivot yet again. So there's a short window of opportunity for people who want to take advantage of the bear market in assets that won't come around for a long time. And as they start printing money, we could see that we might be near the bottom in many asset prices. If you want to know what the best assets are to make it through bear markets and what prices to be able to buy those assets at to make sure you're getting a good deal, get my bear market investing guide on sale right now in the description below. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.